Captain Idris Vex always said the best part of relic hunting was the unknown. The worst part, well, that was also the unknown. It was a life of paradoxes, much like working on a rust bucket freighter with a crew you barely trusted to tie their own boots. Only now, as the ship juddered violently into the docking port of the orbital tower, did Idris wonder if he'd finally found a line even he wouldn't cross. But then curiosity was a cruel mistress, and Idris had always been a sucker for the wrong sort of woman. The orbital tower loomed ahead, all gunmetal gray and the kind of architecture that said built in a hurry and not for comfort. As the gangway extended towards the airlock, Idris glanced at his motley crew, each one a piece of work in their own right. "All right, you bunch of misfits," he said, strapping his blaster to his hip like a man about to walk into a bar fight. "Remember, we're here for the relics, not to start another intergalactic incident." Jax, his engineer who believed hygiene was merely a suggestion, grinned through a haze of beard and bad decisions. "Yeah, Cap. But what if the relics want to start the incident? Then we charge extra," Idris replied, shrugging. "Let's make this quick before the universe throws us another surprise party." As they trudged through the airlock and into the tower, the stale tang of recycled air greeted them like an old friend who owed money. The corridors were narrow and dimly lit, designed more for function than fashion. Idris always found comfort in the ugliness of human architecture. It had a certain honesty to it. "Anyone else feel like we're walking into a bad decision?" asked Kira, their navigator with a penchant for sarcasm and a distressing lack of patience. "Only every second of every day," Idris replied. "But if we start listening to that gut feeling now, we'd never have any fun, would we?" "I think we have different definitions of fun," Kira muttered, her eyes scanning the corridors with the wary look of someone who'd been burned before. They reached the central hub, a circular room filled with terminals and a huge, dusty holomap that flickered with the life expectancy of a cheap bulb. Idris couldn't help but think the place had seen better days, probably around the time dinosaurs were still a big deal. "All right, let's see what we're dealing with," Idris said, tapping at one of the terminals with just enough force to wake it from its electronic slumber. The screen blinked to life, displaying a series of data points and a disturbingly empty inventory log. "Looks like the place has been picked clean," Jax noted, peering over Idris's shoulder. "Or maybe the aliens have finally figured out how to use eBay. Or maybe something bigger is going on," Idris said, frowning at the screen. "Keep your eyes peeled. This doesn't smell right." "Smells like every other death trap we've ever walked into," Kira said, tapping her foot impatiently. As if on cue, the station's comms crackled to life, an alarm blaring with the urgency of a man trying to return a faulty product before the warranty expired. Idris's heart sank as he recognized the sound. It was the universal signal for "you're screwed." "Incoming transmission," the terminal announced, in a voice that sounded like it had been recorded by someone with no interest in your survival. "This is Captain Idris Vex of the freighter Misfortune," Idris said, leaning into the microphone with the kind of enthusiasm usually reserved for tax forms. "Whoever's out there, this had better be good." The response was immediate and not at all what he'd hoped for. "This is the Krelax Dominion. Surrender the tower immediately or face annihilation." "Ah, the Krelax," Jack said, scratching his chin thoughtfully. "I always heard they were a cheerful bunch." "Yes, well, what they lack in friendliness they make up for in firepower," Kira added, pulling up a display of the approaching fleet on the holomap. "And it looks like they're bringing their A-game." Idris sighed, rubbing his temples. "Just once, I'd like to visit a place that isn't on the verge of destruction." "Is that too much to ask? Maybe next time we should pick a spot that doesn't have potential war zone written all over it," Jax suggested helpfully. "Live and learn," Idris muttered, though he was pretty sure they'd done more of the former than the latter. As if things weren't complicated enough, the terminal pinged again, this time displaying a message from yet another source. "Allied forces of the Tavak Alliance, responding to Krelak's aggression, prepare to engage." "Well, look at that," Kira said, not quite managing to hide her disdain. "We've got front row seats to an interstellar showdown." "I'd prefer a refund," Idris replied, eyeing the approaching fleets with a sense of impending doom. "Too bad they don't offer a money-back guarantee on galactic disasters." "So what now, Cap?" Jax asked, looking to Idris for guidance that, truth be told, he wasn't entirely confident giving. "We find something explosive and make sure we aren't in the blast radius," Idris said. "If those relics are still here somewhere, they might be our ticket out." The airlock hissed open behind them, and Idris turned, hand on his blaster, as a shadowy figure stepped into view. "You Idris Vex?" "Depends," Idris said, sizing up the newcomer. "You here to kill me or make a deal?" "Depends," the figure replied with a lopsided grin, a blaster of their own hanging casually at their side. "Name's Zed." "Heard you might be looking for something interesting." "Interesting? I've had enough interesting for one day," Idris said, "but I'll settle for something that'll get us out of this mess." Zed chuckled, a low, rough sound like gravel in a blender. In that case, you're gonna love this. Follow me. They followed Zed through a series of winding corridors, the distant sounds of the impending battle a constant reminder of just how precarious their situation was. If they didn't find a way out soon, they were as good as vapor. Nice place, Jack said, glancing around at the peeling walls and flickering lights. Reminds me of the time we crashed into that junkyard moon, except this time the junk's about to start shooting back, Kira replied. Details, Jack said, waving a hand dismissively. They stopped in front of a heavy door, the kind that suggested whatever lay beyond wasn't keen on visitors. Zed punched in a code, and the door slid open with a groan of protest. Inside, the room was dominated by a large, ominous device that hummed with a barely contained energy. Idris had seen enough relics in his time to know when something was more trouble than it was worth, but desperate times and all that. Is that what I think it is? Kira asked, her voice betraying a mix of awe and terror. If you're thinking it's a prototype jump drive capable of getting us out of this mess and into a whole new one, then yeah, Zed said, a spark of mischief in his eyes. And here I thought we were all out of bad ideas, Jack said, grinning. I prefer to call them creative solutions, Idris said, stepping forward to examine the device. And this one might just save our skins. Outside, the rumble of the approaching fleets grew louder, and the station shook with the force of nearby explosions. Idris could almost hear the universe laughing at their predicament, but if there was one thing Idris Vex was good at, it was making the impossible possible, or at least survivable. All right, let's get this thing fired up, Idris said, rolling up his sleeves like a man about to duel fate. We've got a front row seat to a war, and I'll be damned if we're sticking around for the finale. As they worked, the station trembled and shuddered, the noise of the battle outside a constant reminder of their ticking clock. But Idris had always found a kind of clarity in chaos, like a gambler with nothing left to lose. You sure this thing's safe? Jax asked, fiddling with the controls as if they weren't handling a device that could potentially rip them apart. Define safe, Idris replied, glancing over his shoulder. If you mean won't kill us instantly, then yes. Comforting, Kira said dryly, plugging in coordinates with the precision of someone who really didn't want to die today. I've been called worse, Idris said, grinning despite himself. The device hummed to life, and Idris felt a thrill run through him that was equal parts fear and exhilaration. It was a familiar feeling, like staring into the abyss and realizing the abyss was staring back with a smirk. Here goes nothing, Idris said, flipping the final switch with the kind of reckless abandon that had gotten him this far in life. The world around them blurred, the station dissolving into a kaleidoscope of light and sound. Idris held his breath, praying to whatever gods were out there that they'd come out the other side in one piece. As the jump drive roared to life, he couldn't help but laugh, a wild, unrestrained sound that echoed in the chaos. Because if he was going to die, at least he'd do it with a smile. Idris squinted at the ancient device humming ominously in the center of the room. It looked like someone had taken a microwave from the 21st century and given it a few thousand volts of Plan B. You're telling me this thing can pop us out of here before those fleets turn us into space dust? Jax asked, rattling a few loose wires like they were snake tails. That's the idea, Zed replied with a shrug that suggested he wouldn't mind if it blew up in their faces. What could possibly go wrong? Idris muttered, mostly to himself. With the universe's track record, the list was endless. Look, Captain, we're running out of time, Kira said, her tone caught between urgency and a full-blown exasperation that was her default setting. Either this relic saves our skins, or it makes us the galaxy's most expensive fireworks display. Those fleets outside aren't waiting for us to figure it out, Jax pointed out. He had a keen sense for the obvious, something Idris was occasionally grateful for. All right, Idris said, rubbing his hands together like a man who was about to challenge fate to a thumb war. Let's get this show on the road. Zed guided them to another room, cluttered with relics that looked like a garage sale of human history. Ancient Earth history, to be exact. Idris couldn't help but wonder if whoever put these here was making some kind of point about recycling. Why's all this junk here? Kira asked, poking at a stack of what looked suspiciously like VHS tapes. This tower a museum for the terminally stupid, more like a storage unit for the terminally desperate, Zed replied. These relics were brought here for safekeeping, some kind of last-ditch effort by the Tavak to preserve humanity's legacy. Oh great, Jack said, rolling his eyes. We're babysitting history's leftovers. Idris picked up an old Earth book with a faded cover, something about surviving the end times. He flipped through it, noting with some irony that none of the advice seemed applicable to their current situation. So what's the plan here? Use this stuff to bash the Krelax over the head. Well, Zed said, a grin spreading across his face like a cat with a particularly juicy mouse. There's more to it than meets the eye. Not another history lesson, I hope, Kira groaned, crossing her arms. I ditched school for a reason. Zed tapped a crate in the corner marked handle with extreme caution in faded lettering. Inside this crate is something a bit more volatile. The team gathered around, and Jax pried the crate open with all the finesse of a child unwrapping a present they were certain they'd hate. Nestled within was a sleek black cylinder, emitting a low hum that suggested it wasn't thrilled about being woken up. "What the hell is that?" Kira asked, her voice a mix of awe and dread. "A relic from Earth's final days," Zed explained, his voice dipped in just enough reverence to make Idris worry. "It's a pulse cannon designed to take out entire fleets in one shot." "What, like a really angry flashlight?" Jax ventured, peering into the crate with a kind of reckless curiosity. "More like a grumpy death ray," Zed corrected. "One we can use to turn the tables on those Krellex bastards." Idris raised an eyebrow. And this was just lying around, gathering dust. "Turns out, humanity had a few tricks up their sleeves before they got themselves wiped out," Zed said. "The Tavak kept it hidden here for the right moment. Lucky for us that moment's now." Idris considered this, glancing at his crew. "So, what do we do? Play nice with our new toy or take it out for spin?" Kira snorted. "I say we pull the trigger and see what happens. Worst case, we blow up the place and don't have to worry about our next meal." "Always the optimist," Jax remarked, shaking his head with a grin. "Look, we can't just fire off some ancient doomsday device without considering the consequences," Idris said, trying his best to sound like the responsible adult he wasn't. "We need to decide if we're going to protect these relics or use them." "Protect them," Kira laughed, a sound that was more bitter than sweet. "From what? The universe that's been trying to kill us since day one. Maybe there's a way to do both," Idris mused, eyeing the pulse cannon with a mix of caution and longing. "We use it just enough to give us an edge, then get the hell out with everything intact." "That's assuming it works," Jax pointed out, fiddling with the controls like he was adjusting a TV antenna. "And that we don't turn this tower into a smoking crater," Kira added. "Small details," Idris said with a wave of his hand. He turned to Zed. "Think you can get this thing operational?" Zed nodded. "I've tinkered with enough old tech to make it up as I go along. Just give me a few minutes." "Minutes we might not have," Kira muttered, casting a wary glance at the walls that felt like they were closing in. As Zed worked, Idris paced the room, the weight of the decision pressing down like a lead vest. He'd always lived by the creed of making the best out of a bad situation, and this one was a doozy. The Krellex and Tavek were about to slug it out in a celestial boxing match, and here he was trying to figure out if he should throw a sucker punch or just duck. "All right, Captain," Zed called, wiping sweat from his brow. "She's ready to go." "Okay, team," Idris said, gathering them around like a general with a plan just crazy enough to work. "We've got a choice. We can sit back and hope the Tavak don't get obliterated, or we take a swing with this relic and pray it doesn't blow up in our faces." Jax cocked his head, considering. "I'd say let's roll the dice. Beats sitting here with our thumbs up our." "Noted," Idris interrupted, holding up a hand. "Kira, you're on navigation. Jax, make sure this thing doesn't overload. Zed, you and I will handle the targeting." The team moved into action, each member slipping into their roles with the kind of precision that came from years of dodging death together. Idris's hand hovered over the firing mechanism, a bead of sweat trickling down his temple. "On my mark," he said, his voice steady despite the chaos outside. The station shuddered violently, debris clattering down like rain. Idris could almost feel the Krellex bearing down, ready to snuff them out like a particularly annoying mosquito. "Mark," he shouted, slamming his hand down with all the finality of a judge's gavel. The pulse cannon roared to life, energy surging through the relic with an intensity that was almost palpable. Idris held his breath, waiting for either salvation or oblivion. Outside, the cosmos lit up like a supernova, the cannon's blast ripping through the void with a terrible beauty. The Krellex fleet staggered, ships breaking apart like so many tin cans kicked by a petulant god. "Looks like we got their attention," Kira said, her mouth quirking into a grin that didn't quite reach her eyes. "Let's hope it's the good kind," Jax added, sweating bullets as he monitored the relic's vitals. Idris watched the aftermath on the holomap, the Krellex ships in disarray, buying them precious time. The Tavek were moving in, their own forces scrambling to take advantage of the chaos. "Now what?" Kira asked, her eyes flicking between the screen and Idris. "Now we get the hell out of here," Idris replied, already moving to the jump drive controls. Before someone decides to return the favor, they worked quickly, each second a countdown to their potential demise. Idris punched in the coordinates for a system so remote even the stars forgot it existed. "Everyone hold on to something," he said, gripping the console like it was a lifeline. The jump drive engaged, and the world twisted and warped around them, the familiar sensation of being pulled through the fabric of space. Idris felt his stomach drop, his vision swimming as reality reasserted itself with a jolt. They arrived in the middle of nowhere, the stars distant and indifferent. Idris exhaled, the tension in his shoulders easing just a fraction. Welcome to the middle of nowhere, Kira said, looking less than impressed. Home sweet home, Jax added, slumping into his seat with a sigh of relief. At least we're alive, Idris pointed out, though he knew better than to tempt fate with such declarations. Zed chuckled, the sound rough and more than a little relieved. Guess that pulse cannon was worth the risk after all. For now, Idris said, glancing at the relics scattered around them. We've got a treasure trove of history here. Question is, what do we do with it? Kira shrugged. Sell it, keep it, I don't care. As long as I get paid and don't end up as stardust. Idris nodded, a plan forming in his mind. Let's lay low, figure out our next move. We've got history in our hands, and I'd like to make sure we don't end up repeating it. Here's to hoping, Jack said, raising an imaginary glass. Idris looked out at the stars, a wry smile playing on his lips. After all, what's the worst that could happen? With the universe's track record, he was sure he'd find out soon enough. But for now, they'd escaped with their lives and a few victories under their belts. And in Idris Vex's line of work, that was as close to a win as you got. The rust bucket freighter hung in the void like a forgotten toy, its hull a patchwork of scars and mismatched plating. Inside, Idris Vex paced the cramped bridge like a caged animal, each footstep adding to the symphony of creaking metal and the occasional hissing vent. The rest of his ragtag crew watched him with varying levels of interest and exasperation. You're gonna wear a hole in the deck, Jack said, leaning back in his chair, arms crossed behind his head like he was on vacation and not floating in the middle of nowhere. Better a hole in the deck than one in our hull, Idris shot back, his mind racing with half-formed plans and an ever-growing sense of impending doom. Krelax don't seem the forgiving type. Yeah, you hit them with an ancient doomsday weapon and suddenly they get all touchy, Kira said, rolling her eyes and peering into the endless black through the viewport. Zed, ever the optimist, tinkered with the half-busted control panel, his fingers moving over the keys like he was playing an out-of-tune piano. We've got options. Not good ones, mind, but options. Spare me the motivational speech, Zed, Idris sighed, rubbing the back of his neck. We need more than options. We need a miracle. Well, Captain Miracles are in short supply, Kira said, her tone perfectly balanced between sarcasm and actual concern. But we do have a big, scary gun that says don't mess with us. That's gotta count for something. Idris stopped his pacing and nodded, more to himself than anyone else. We need to keep the Krelax off our backs long enough for the Tavak to get their act together, and we do that by making them think twice about coming after us. And how do you plan on doing that? Jax asked, eyebrow raised in challenge. Sing him a lullaby? No, we improvise, Idris replied, a dangerous glint in his eye, the kind you get right before you do something incredibly stupid, or brilliant if you're lucky. Kira groaned. Improvisation, my favorite way to end up in a body bag. Trust me, I've got a plan, Idris said, already moving toward the relic storage room. More or less, the room was as cluttered as ever, history's leftovers piled haphazardly like the aftermath of a century-spanning garage sale. Idris rifled through the stacks, picking up relics and tossing them aside with a muttered commentary that was neither kind nor repeatable in polite company. What exactly are you looking for? Zed asked, trying to make sense of Idris's method, or lack thereof. Something that screams don't mess with us louder than a pulse cannon, Idris replied, holding up a relic that looked suspiciously like an ancient toaster, and won't blow us to hell in the process. Kira picked up an old Earth helmet, its visor cracked and useless. You mean like wearing this and hoping they die laughing? Not quite, Idris said, discarding the toaster and moving on to a crate marked with faded caution symbols that promised doom or salvation or both. Think bigger. Jax, finally curious enough to join in, leaned over Idris's shoulder. Well, bigger tends to mean more explosive. You sure we want to go down that road? No, but we're already on it, Idris said, prying the crate open to reveal a jumble of wires, circuit boards, and what might once have been a coffee maker. Ah, there you are, and what is it? Zed asked, the skepticism practically dripping from his words. A little something the Tavak left behind, Idris replied, eyeing the device with a grin that was all bravado. An energy shield generator, Kira snorted. Yeah, and I'm the Queen of Mars. That thing looks like it couldn't keep out a stiff breeze. That's where you're wrong, Idris said, lifting the generator with all the care of a man handling a live grenade. This beauty can project a field strong enough to keep us safe. Or fry us in our seats if I screw it up. Comforting thought, Jax muttered, though there was a hint of admiration in his voice. You really think you can get it working? With Zed's help, yeah, Idris said, nodding at the techie. You up for a little mad science experiment? Zed shrugged, a lopsided grin on his face. Mad science is the best kind of science. Let's see what we can cobble together. As the two set to work, Kira and Jax hovered at the edges, offering the kind of helpful commentary that involved pointing out every potential pitfall without actually contributing to the solution. Hey, just don't blow us up before lunch, Kira quipped, earning a chuckle from Jax. Idris ignored them, his focus entirely on the mess of cables and circuits in front of him. Time was ticking, the Krellaks were on their tail, and the Tavek were only marginally less likely to shoot first and ask questions never. What's the worst that could happen? Zed asked, soldering iron in hand, sparks flying like confetti at a particularly grim party. I could make a list, Idris said, but it'd just be depressing. Tell me you've at least got a backup plan, Kira said, leaning against the wall, her arms crossed and her expression equal parts concern and resignation. Sure, Idris replied, not missing a beat. It's called run like hell and hope they're slower than us, Jax snorted. In other words, we're screwed. Pretty much, Idris admitted, adjusting the settings on the generator with a mix of hope and desperation. But I've always been a fan of long odds. The generator whirred to life with a sound that was somewhere between a purr and a growl, the kind of noise that promised either miracles or mishaps in equal measure. Okay, here goes nothing, Idris said, flipping the final switch. The energy shield hummed to life, a translucent barrier flickering into existence around the freighter. Idris held his breath, waiting for either the reassuring stability of a working shield or the explosive finale of a failed one. To his immense relief and mild surprise, it was the former. The shield held, a shimmering bubble of safety against the vast, uncaring void. Looks like you did it, Kira said, a grudging note of admiration in her voice. Well, I'll be damned, Jax said, shaking his head. You actually pulled it off. Don't sound so surprised, Idris said, though he was grinning like a kid who'd just gotten away with something. Told you I had a plan. Yeah, a plan that involved enough luck to make a leprechaun jealous, Zed pointed out, though he was grinning too. Whatever works, Idris replied, glancing at the holomap. Now we just need to keep it together long enough to figure out our next move, and avoid getting blown to bits in the process, Kira added, ever the voice of reason. Details, details, Idris said with a dismissive wave. Let's see if this thing can actually do what it says on the tin, or if we're just buying ourselves a more dramatic end, Jax said, his tone light even as he buckled in for whatever was coming next. The Krellak ships were closing in, their formation tightening like a noose. Idris watched them on the monitor, his mind racing through the possibilities like a gambler on a losing streak looking for one last win. All right, folks, he said, settling into the captain's chair, the weight of command and the looming threat settling over him like a second skin. Let's show the universe what we're made of. With a flick of a switch and a silent prayer to whatever gods might be listening, Idris activated the shield's full power. The generator roared to life, the barrier around their ship flaring with a fierce, defiant glow. The Krellaks didn't seem impressed, their weapons charging with grim inevitability, but Idris wasn't about to roll over and accept his fate, not without a fight. Hold on tight, he said, the adrenaline surging through him like a shot of pure instinct. This is gonna get bumpy. The first volley from the Krellaks slammed into the shield, the impact reverberating through the freighter like a hammer on an anvil. Idris clenched his teeth, willing the shield to hold. Every second it did a victory snatched from the jaws of defeat. We're still here, Zed called, his voice tight with concentration as he adjusted the shield's modulation. For now, Jax added, though there was a touch of awe in his voice that hadn't been there before. Idris didn't reply, his focus entirely on the dance of lasers and energy fields outside. The shield flickered and shuddered, but it held, defying the odds with a stubbornness that matched its captain. Okay, you beautiful piece of junk, Idris muttered, patting the console with something that might have been affection. Just a little longer. As if in answer, the shield flared again, holding against another barrage with a resilience that shouldn't have been possible. But Idris had long since learned to stop questioning miraculous survivals. He'd take them where he could get them. Looks like we might just pull this off, Kira said, her voice laced with cautious hope. Don't jinx it, Jax warned, though his grin was infectious. Let's just focus on not dying, Idris said, his eyes never leaving the monitor, the dance of death and survival playing out in stark relief against the cold backdrop of space. The Krellaks seemed to share his sentiment, their attacks growing more desperate as they realized their quarry wasn't going down without a fight. Idris watched their movements, his mind working at a pace that bordered on frantic. All right, time for the next phase, he said, his voice steady despite the chaos. Kira, get us ready to move. Jax, keep an eye on the power levels. Zed maintained the shield. You got it, Captain, Kira said, her fingers flying over the controls with practiced ease. Hope you're not expecting a miracle, Jax added, his tone light but his actions precise. Miracles are overrated, Idris said, his grin sharp as a knife. I'll settle for a narrow escape. With the shield still holding, Idris brought the freighter's engines to life, the familiar thrum of power vibrating through the deck like a heartbeat. The Krellak ships continued their assault, but the shield absorbed the worst of it, buying them precious time. On my mark, Idris said, his focus narrowing to a single point, the moment of decision hanging in the balance. The freighter shuddered as Kira brought it around, the maneuvering thrusters burning hard, pushing them toward the narrow gap in the Krelax formation. Idris held his breath, the tension coiling tighter with every passing second. "Now," he shouted, slamming the throttle forward. The freighter surged ahead, the engines roaring with a defiance that echoed Idris's own. The Krelax ship scrambled to intercept, but the shield held, a flickering barrier between them and oblivion. They punched through the formation, the stars blurring past in a kaleidoscope of light and speed. Idris felt the adrenaline ebb, replaced by the slow burn of cautious triumph. "Well, that was fun," Jack said, his voice tinged with relief as he sagged back into his seat. "Fun's one word for it," Kira said, her gaze fixed on the stars ahead, the danger receding behind them. "More like suicidal," Zed added, though there was no mistaking the pride in his voice. Idris let out a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding, the weight of survival settling over him like a familiar cloak. They'd made it, barely. But in a universe that seemed hellbent on their destruction, barely was as good as a victory parade. "Looks like we made it," Idris said, a wry smile playing on his lips as he met the eyes of his crew. "For now, anyway." "For now," Kira echoed, her expression softening with a rare smile. Idris nodded, his gaze drifting to the relics they'd fought so hard to protect. They were safe for the moment. But the universe had a way of keeping things interesting. "All right, folks," he said, settling back into his seat. "Let's see where this crazy ride takes us next." And with that, they slipped into the vast expanse of space, the stars their only witness, and their future as uncertain as ever. But Idris wouldn't have it. The freighter hummed its way through the cold void like a wounded animal limping towards sanctuary. The Krelax, those grim-faced gloom merchants, had finally receded into the black, presumably to lick their wounds or polish their egos. Not that Idris Vex gave a rusty bolt about their motives. He had bigger space fish to fry. The shield was still holding, though it had started making a noise like a 2-credit washing machine on its last spin cycle. Idris leaned back in the captain's chair, trying to ignore the persistent squeak in the armrest that had been there longer than any of his relationships. "All right, crew, let's do a quick damage assessment," Idris said, scanning the faces of his motley band of misfits. His tone was as cheerful as a gravedigger's at quitting time. Kira, ever the voice of impending doom, glanced at the console. "The shield's gonna need some TLC before long. It's not designed for this kind of abuse. Like the rest of us. Abuse, please," Jax interjected with a grin. "This is just a regular Tuesday and the engine's got a tick," Zed added, frowning as he fiddled with a cable that definitely shouldn't have been sparking like that. "Tick, more like a death rattle," Idris muttered, rubbing his temples. "If it turns into a full-blown asthma attack, we're doomed." Jax piped up, his arms folded behind his head, because why would a life-or-death situation interrupt nap time? "So what's the plan, Captain? Other than praying the engine doesn't cough itself into oblivion." "Well, I was thinking of sending the Krelax a nice fruit basket to apologize for our rude departure," Idris said dryly. "Or maybe we could try something crazy like, I don't know, surviving. Survival's overrated," Jax replied. "Besides, I hear the afterlife has great happy hours." "Focus, people," Kira snapped, her eyes darting between the controls and the viewport. "We need to figure out our next move, and fast. We're not exactly sitting pretty. More like sitting in a dumpster fire waiting for the trash compactor," Idris added. "Any ideas?" Zed leaned over the control panel, his eyes alight with a spark that could only be described as dangerous curiosity. "Well, there's always the diplomatic approach." Everyone in the room stopped what they were doing to stare at him. Jax choked on a laugh. "Diplomacy, with the Krelax. Might as well try reasoning with a black hole." "No, not them," Zed clarified, his fingers dancing over the interface like a pianist in a losing competition. "I mean the Tavak. Word is there's a faction willing to talk." Idris raised an eyebrow. "And why, pray tell, would they be interested in chatting with us?" "Word on the space grapevine is they're not too keen on the Krelax either. Something about not wanting to be assimilated into their joyless collective," Kira snorted, "and we're the lesser evil. I guess beggars can't be choosers, or in this case, prisoners can't be picky," Jax quipped, earning a glare from Kira. Idris considered this, the gears in his mind creaking into action. "All right, Zed, see if you can reach them, but keep it on the down low. Last thing we need is the Krelax getting wind of our little diplomatic mission." Zed nodded, already lost in the circuitry. "On it, Captain. Let's see if we can't make some new frenemies." Idris settled back, feeling the weight of the universe pressing down on him like a particularly clingy ex. "Everyone else, keep us in one piece. I'd like to live long enough to regret whatever harebrained scheme we end up concocting." The crew dispersed, each heading to their stations with an air of grim determination. As always, the only constant was the uncertainty of their survival and the certainty of their cynicism. Hours passed in a blur of activity, the freighter a veritable hive of cursing, tinkering, and sarcastic banter. Idris found himself in the cluttered mess of a room they called the engine bay, knee-deep in wires and bad decisions. Kira stepped in, wiping her hands on a rag that had seen better centuries. How's it looking? Like a funeral pyre waiting for match, Idris replied, yanking on a particularly stubborn cable. But we've been through worse. Name one time, Kira challenged, her eyebrow arched. Idris opened his mouth, then shut it again. Point taken. But hey, no one said the pirate life was easy. Pirates at least have a code, Kira pointed out, a hint of a smile tugging at her lips. And better hygiene, Idris admitted. All right, maybe we're more like freelance treasure hunters, who occasionally annoy the wrong kind of interstellar warlords, Kira added. Details, Idris waved her off. Besides, I think Zed's got a lead. He mentioned something about a Tavek outpost not too far from here. Do you trust them? Kira asked, crossing her arms. Trust is a strong word. More like I distrust them less than I distrust the Krelax. And right now I'm willing to take what I can get. Fair enough, Kira said, nodding. Just don't get us killed. No promises, Idris said, his grin more grimace than smile. But I'll try my best. A crackle over the intercom interrupted their repartee, Zed's voice echoing through the ship. Captain, I've got a response. They're willing to meet, but they want assurances. Assurances, Idris echoed, frowning. What do they think we are, diplomats, more like desperate spacers, Zed replied. But they're open to negotiations. Something about common interests. I'm interested in not being space dust. Does that count? Jax chimed in from the bridge. Idris sighed, rolling his shoulders as though preparing for a necessary but unpleasant task. All right, set a course. Let's see if we can't charm the pants off these Tavek diplomats, assuming they wear pants, Kira pointed out. And assuming they don't shoot us on sight, Jax added. I mean, let's be real here, it's at least 50-50, optimism, Jax. It's what keeps us from despair, Idris said, ignoring the skeptical look Kira shot his way. Or from facing reality, Kira muttered under her breath. The freighter lurched as it changed trajectory, the engines straining against the new course. Idris felt the familiar pull of anticipation mixed with dread, a cocktail he'd grown far too accustomed to over the years. The Tavek outpost loomed ahead, a gunmetal gray tower that seemed as welcoming as a tax audit. Idris steeled himself, checking the display with a grim smile. All right, folks, let's see where this dance takes us. The docking process was surprisingly smooth, which naturally put Idris on edge. Smooth meant easy, easy meant traps, or at the very least, unexpected taxes. They disembarked in a bay that could charitably be described as functional. The Tavek envoy was waiting for them, their expression as inscrutable as a politician's promise. Welcome, the envoy said, their voice resonating with an odd duality. We understand you wish to discuss an alliance. We're open to discussing not being blown to bits, Idris replied, his posture relaxed but his eyes sharp. Call it what you will, the envoy inclined their head, a gesture that might have been agreement or merely indulgence. Hard to tell with Tavek. We share a mutual inconvenience. The Krelax have become problematic. That's one way to put it, Idris said wryly. So what's your proposal? A temporary alliance. We assist you in evading the Krelax, and in return you provide us with certain technologies. Jax leaned in, whispering just loud enough for everyone to hear. Tech, we can barely keep our own ship running. Idris shot him a look. We might not have much, but we're resourceful, and we know a few tricks the Krelax haven't caught on to yet. Indeed, the envoy said, their eyes glinting with interest. Your escape was most instructive, glad to entertain, Idris said. But let's cut to the chase. What do you really want? Access, the envoy said simply, to the relics you have secured, and there it was. Idris felt a cold shiver run down his spine. The relics, the very things that had landed them in this mess. Was trusting the Tavek worth the risk? Kira shot him a look, her eyes saying what her words wouldn't. Is this a good idea? Idris hesitated, then nodded. All right, we can discuss terms, but let's be clear, any funny business, and this arrangement goes sire faster than Jax's cooking hay. Jax protested, but Idris ignored him. The envoy nodded, an agreement forged in necessity rather than trust. Very well. Let us proceed. As Idris followed the envoy deeper into the labyrinthine outpost, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were stepping into a larger game, one where the stakes were their lives, and the rules were written by someone else. But then, when had that ever stopped him before? Remember, team, Idris said over his shoulder, his voice low and laced with cynical humor. Keep your wits sharp and your weapons sharper. We might just survive this yet, or at least die trying, Jax quipped, falling into step behind him. Always the optimist, Kira said dryly, and they continued forward, into the unknown with all the grace of a circus on fire. But Idris wouldn't have it any other way. After all, what was life without a little chaos to keep things interesting? The Tavek envoy led Idris and his crew through the labyrinthine guts of the outpost, each corridor a drab monument to the joys of brutalist architecture. If the place had windows, they'd probably be overlooking a scenic view of more gunmetal gray. The occasional hiss of steam and distant hum of machinery did little to lighten the mood, but at least it covered the sound of Jax's stomach, which, if left unchecked, could outvolume the freighter's engine. So when do we start singing Kumbaya? Jax quipped, earning himself a sharp look from Kira. Probably right after they stab us in the back, she replied. You know, team-building exercise. Idris kept his eyes ahead, focusing on the envoy who glided with the kind of confidence that said, I know exactly where all the traps are. It was both reassuring and unnerving, a little like finding an ancient doomsday weapon and realizing it had no instruction manual. As they entered a larger chamber, Idris couldn't help but notice the numerous Tavak guards. They stood like statues, probably whispering telepathically about how they could fry their new guests with a thought, or maybe they were just trying to decide what was for lunch. Hard to tell with Tavak. The envoy gestured to a central table, sleek and ominous. Please sit. We have much to discuss. Yeah, like how we can mutually benefit from not being obliterated, Idris said, easing into a chair that felt more like a dentist's death trap. How cozy. Your sarcasm is noted, the envoy replied, their tone devoid of the human amusement Idris had hoped for. Seems the Tavak had about as much humor as a brick wall, or worse, an accountant. So what assurances do you need from us? Kira cut in, crossing her arms as if to shield herself from the inevitable nonsense. Assurances that you won't double-cross us the moment this becomes inconvenient, the envoy said, sounding just as thrilled about this meeting as Idris felt. We understand trust is fragile, like Jax's promise to quit gambling, Idris added, shooting a glance at Jax, who feigned innocence. Kira's right. What exactly are you proposing here? Before the envoy could answer, an alarm blared through the outpost, its piercing wail proving that terrible sound design transcended species. The guards immediately went from decorative to deadly, their movements synchronized with robotic precision. Seems we've got company, Jax muttered, hand inching towards his sidearm with the subtlety of a sledgehammer. The Krelax, the envoy spat, as if the name itself was an insult. They've infiltrated the outpost. Great. Just when the party was getting started, Kira said, her cynicism dialed up to 11. What's the plan, Captain? Survive, preferably with all our limbs intact, Idris replied, his brain scrambling for options like a rat in a maze. Only this maze had no cheese, just timed explosives. The envoy barked orders in their native tongue, the guards snapping to action. We must secure the relics, they said, turning to Idris. Our alliance must wait. For now, we fight. Music to my ears, Jax said, his grin more manic than reassuring. Let's hope these Krelax are as bad at fighting as they are at diplomacy. The crew followed the envoy, weaving through the chaos of the outpost as the sounds of battle echoed around them like some twisted symphony. The Krelax were nothing if not persistent, and their idea of diplomacy usually involved a lot of screaming and lasers. Idris found himself in a narrow corridor, the air thick with tension and the stench of burned metal. A Krelax warrior appeared, its chitinous armor glistening under the emergency lights. Idris fired without hesitation, the shot searing through the air and finding its mark. The Krelax crumpled with a screech more grating than nails on a chalkboard. Nice shot, Kira said, firing her own weapon at another Krelax looming at the end of the corridor. You should teach Jax, his aim's worse than his jokes. Hey, my jokes are legendary, Jax protested, his shots a little less precise but no less enthusiastic. Just like my ability to survive when the universe wants me dead. You mean luck, Kira corrected, reloading with the calm efficiency of someone completely at home in chaos. Potato potato, Jax replied, as they finally reached the room housing the relics. The place was a disaster. Wires dangled from the ceiling like mechanical vines, and the relics themselves were scattered haphazardly, as if someone had thrown a particularly aggressive garage sale. Grab what you can, Idris instructed, and pray the Krelax aren't interested in negotiating. Like they ever are, Zed added, his fingers dancing over a relic's interface, trying to activate whatever defensive systems it might have. Let's hope this old tech still respects its elders. The sound of approaching Krelax grew louder, their guttural cries echoing off the walls. Idris felt the familiar surge of adrenaline, the kind that reminded him life was short and usually painful. We're outnumbered, Kira pointed out, her voice steady despite the chaos. Outnumbered, outgunned, out of luck, Idris said, gritting his teeth. Just another day in paradise. The Krelax stormed into the room, their weapons humming with lethal energy. Idris and his team fired back, the air filled with the acrid stench of energy discharge and burning flesh. It was a hellscape, but they'd faced worse. Probably, though Idris couldn't remember when. The fight raged, the crew holding their ground with a tenacity born of desperation and a healthy dose of spite. The Tavak guards joined the fray, their combat prowess adding a much-needed edge to the uneven battle. Idris, Zed shouted, pointing to a relic suddenly humming with life. I think it's doing something good or bad, Idris yelled back, ducking a stray shot that singed the air with a sizzle. Zed shrugged, his face a mask of helpless bewilderment. Guess we're about to find out, the relic pulsed, a wave of energy sweeping through the room, hitting everyone like a tidal wave of migraine-inducing light. Idris felt his hair stand on end, the air crackling with electrifying uncertainty. Then, as quickly as it began, the light receded, leaving them all in a disoriented silence. The Krelax were gone, vanished as if they'd never been there. But so were the Tavak guards, leaving Idris and his crew alone in the wreckage-strewn room. What the hell just happened? Jax asked, rubbing his eyes as if trying to clear away the remnants of a particularly stubborn dream. The relic, Zed said, pointing at the now dormant artifact. It teleported them. Great, Kira said, her voice dripping with sarcasm. We've got a teleporting death machine, and we're stuck in the middle of nowhere with no backup. Could be worse, Idris said, his voice lacking any real conviction. Could be raining. As if on cue, a distant rumble echoed through the outpost, the sound of approaching reinforcements, or worse. The Krelax weren't known for giving up easily, and Idris knew they'd be back, probably with more firepower and a bigger grudge. We need a plan, Kira said, ever the voice of reason in a world that made none. And we need it fast. Idris nodded, feeling the weight of the universe bearing down on him like a cosmic anvil. Let's regroup on the freighter. Maybe we can figure out what to do with this relic before it decides to vaporize us. The crew moved quickly, their footsteps echoing in the now silent corridors. The outpost felt eerily empty, the absence of enemies as unnerving as their presence had been. Idris couldn't help but feel like a rat scurrying through a maze, always one step away from the trap. Back on the freighter, the familiar hum of the engines was a welcome sound, even if it was accompanied by the unsettling clank of parts that probably needed replacing about 2 centuries ago. The crew gathered in the cramped cockpit, eyes on Idris as if expecting him to pull a miracle out of somewhere miracles usually didn't come from. All right, Idris said, taking a deep breath. We're in deep, as usual, but we're not dead yet. Let's figure out what this relic can do and how we can use it to our advantage. And if it decides to turn us all into cosmic dust, Jax asked, leaning back with the kind of nonchalance that came from years of ignoring his own mortality. Then at least we won't have to worry about the Krelax anymore, Idris replied, his grin as sharp as a knife's edge. Zed set the relic on the console, his fingers already working to unlock its secrets. I'll see what I can do, Captain, but no promises. This tech is older than our great-grandparents' grudges. Just do your best, Idris said, clapping Zed on the shoulder, and everyone else prepare for the worst. The Krelax aren't going to wait for us to get comfortable. The crew nodded, each member slipping into their roles with the ease of long practice. It wasn't much, but it was theirs, and in a universe where the only constant was chaos, sometimes that was enough. Idris watched them, feeling a surge of something that wasn't quite hope but wasn't entirely hopeless either. Maybe, just maybe, they'd find a way out of this mess with their skins intact, or at the very least they'd go down swinging. And if that wasn't a victory, Idris didn't know what was. Idris Vex tapped a finger on the ancient relic, its metallic surface cold and unyielding. It looked more like a smashed blender than a weapon of mass destruction, but who was he to judge alien technology? Maybe it was one of those looks can be deceiving situations, like trusting a politician to deliver on campaign promises. So, what's the plan, Captain? Kira asked, her skepticism palpable enough to cut through the tension like a plasma blade. She leaned against the bulkhead, arms crossed, the universal sign of someone who'd seen too many things go sideways to believe in easy solutions. Plan A, Idris began, flashing a grin as dry as a Martian desert, is to figure out how to use this thing before the Krelax return with a vengeance. Plan B, of course, involves a lot of screaming and possibly learning to pray. Comforting, Jack said, throwing himself into a creaky chair with the grace of a sloth on caffeine. And here I thought today was going to be boring. Zed, any luck with our new toy? Zed squinted at the relic, his fingers a blur over its inscrutable controls. It's old tech, Captain, probably older than the concept of safety regulations. But there's something here, a kind of energy signature. I just need to make it go boom, Jack suggested, optimism more misplaced than a tourist in a minefield. Not quite, Zed replied, a bead of sweat tracing a path down his temple. I'm thinking more along the lines of making it go zap. It might just have the juice we need to turn the tables on the Krelax. Fantastic, Kira said, her voice oozing sarcasm like a sponge soaked in cynicism. All we need is for a relic from an ancient civilization to save our hides. What could possibly go wrong? Plenty, Idris admitted, pacing the cramped cockpit as if movement could somehow stimulate a breakthrough in problem-solving. But let's focus on the positives. We've got a relic, it does something, and the Krelax aren't here yet. Yet, Kira echoed, the word hanging in the air like a particularly unwelcome guest. They'll be back. You know how they get when they are angry. Like a wasp's nest in a blender, Jax added, spinning his chair in a slow circle. Zed, any chance you can make that zap happen before they come knocking? I'm working on it. Zed said through gritted teeth, the relic's interface glowing ominously. It's like trying to decipher an alien crossword puzzle where none of the clues make sense. Trust me, I've seen weirder, Idris said, glancing out the viewport at the expanse of stars. And I've survived worse. Probably. Maybe. If we don't, at least we won't have to worry about paying back those gambling debts, Jack said with a grin that was somewhere between cheerful and clinically insane. True, but I was kind of hoping to get out of this alive, Kira replied, checking her weapon's charge. I've got a date with a bottle of something strong once this is over, and that's the spirit, Idris said, clapping his hands together. Let's keep that focus. Zed, how soon before we know if this thing is going to save us or send us to the afterlife? Zed didn't look up, his focus sharper than a scorned lover's retort. Give me a few more minutes. I think I've found a way to channel the energy. If I can get it right, we might just have ourselves a weapon. A weapon that we have no idea how to aim, Jax asked, raising an eyebrow. I think that's what they call a feature, not a bug, Zed replied, a hint of a grin breaking through his concentration. Worst case, we just pointed at something we don't like and hope for the best. Sounds like a typical Tuesday, Idris said, his humor doing little to mask the undercurrent of tension in the room. All right, everyone, lock and load. Let's make sure we're ready when our guests arrive. The crew prepared, the air heavy with anticipation. Idris felt the familiar thrill of the unknown, that heady mix of fear and excitement. He'd always said the best part of relic hunting was the unknown. The worst part, too, but it was moments like these that made it all worth it, if they survived, of course. Moments later, a klaxon wailed through the ship, a shrill reminder that the universe never slept, not even for a minute. Jax's face lit up with the kind of excitement most people reserved for birthdays or surprise inheritances. Sounds like company, he said, checking his sidearm. The Krelax, Kira said, her voice steady and calm like the eye of a storm. Looks like they're here for round 2. Perfect timing, Zed muttered, hands flying over the relic's controls. I've managed to harness some of the energy. It's not pretty, but it might just work. Might? Idris asked, raising an eyebrow. Look, Captain, this is technology from an era when people probably thought fire was a cutting-edge invention, Zed said. But if we're lucky, and I mean incredibly lucky, we can use it to give the Krelax a nasty surprise. Luck's been our co-pilot this whole time, Jack said, a smirk plastered on his face. Let's see if it sticks with us a bit longer. Everyone to your stations, Idris ordered, taking his place at the helm. It's showtime. The freighter rumbled to life, its engines coughing like an asthmatic lung. Idris felt the ship respond under his hands, a comforting reminder that even rust buckets could be reliable. The Krelax ships loomed on the horizon, sleek and deadly, their intent as transparent as a politician's promise. Zed, on my signal, give them everything we've got, Idris said, his voice calm and clear. Kira, Jax, be ready to engage if they get too close. Ready and willing, Captain, Kira replied, her weapon at the ready. You know me, Jax added. Always up for good fight. The Krelax ships closed in, their formation tighter than a miser's wallet. Idris's heart pounded in his chest, the adrenaline a potent cocktail that burned away doubt and fear. Now Zed hit the controls, the relic pulsing with a light so intense it seemed to swallow space itself. A beam shot out, a searing lance of energy that cut through the void with the inevitability of taxes. The Krelax ships reeled, their sleek forms caught in the weapon's grasp, shaken like a snow globe in a child's hands. Direct hit, Kira shouted, her voice a mixture of shock and triumph. Hell, we actually did it, Jax added, his laugh loud and disbelieving. Guess that Relic still got some kick in it. The Krelax ships wobbled, their once-coordinated assault now a scene of chaos. Idris felt a flicker of hope, a rare commodity in a universe determined to crush it at every opportunity. Keep up the pressure, Idris instructed, his focus unyielding. Let's see how they like a taste of their own medicine. Zed worked the controls, the relic humming with power as it unleashed another wave of energy. The Krelax ships scrambled, their sleek lines marred by the unexpected ferocity of the attack. One ship spiraled out of control, its engines ablaze of light and fury as it careened into its comrades. They're falling back, Kira announced, her tone incredulous yet tinged with a bite of satisfaction. And not a moment too soon, Idris said, exhaling a breath he hadn't realized he'd been holding. Zed, keep that relic charged. We might need it again, noted, Zed replied, casting a wary glance at the artifact. But let's not push our luck. This thing's barely holding together as it is. We'll take what we can get, Idris said, his grin returning with the ease of an old friend. Everyone, keep your eyes peeled. The Krelax might be regrouping, and we have to stay one step ahead. The crew settled into a wary calm, the adrenaline high giving way to a cautious optimism. The universe was still out to get them, but for the moment they'd snatched a victory from the jaws of defeat. It was a rare feeling, and Idris intended to savor it as long as he could. Iors passed, the stars sliding past as the freighter maneuvered through the void. The Krellaks had withdrawn for now at least, licking their wounds and plotting their next move. Idris knew they wouldn't stay away forever, but he'd take the respite all the same. Kira joined him at the helm, her expression softening as the tension ebbed away. "We actually pulled it off," she said, a smile playing at the corners of her lips. "Not bad for a bunch of misfits and a relic held together by hope and duct tape," Idris replied, a chuckle rumbling in his throat. "What's next?" she asked, her gaze steady. Idris leaned back in his chair, the weight of the universe momentarily lighter on his shoulders. "We regroup, we repair what we can, and we figure out how to make that relic keep working. Because I have a feeling this is just the beginning." "Always knew you were an optimist at heart," Kira teased, her eyes glinting with mischief. "Optimist? Nah," Idris said with a shrug. "Just a realist with a good sense of humor and a lot of nerve." The freighter sailed on, a lone ship in a sea of stars, its crew ready for whatever the universe threw at them next. They'd survive as they always did, one day at a time. After all, in the grand scheme of things, that was all anyone could ask for. Idris Vex stood in the cramped cockpit, clutching a mug of sludge masquerading as coffee, his eyes narrowed at the chaotic dance of Krellak's ships on the view screen. "Well," he said, taking a sip and grimacing as if he'd just swallowed a live tarantula, "they're not taking the hint." "Zed, you think that Relic's got another surprise left in it?" Zed, hunched over the Relic's incomprehensible controls like a monk at a prayer wheel, barely glanced up. "Oh, it's positively bursting with surprises, Captain. Mostly of the oops variety, but I'm sure we can make the best of a bad situation." "Story of our lives," Jax chimed in, running a hand through hair that defied gravity, much like his sense of humor. "What's the worst that'll happen? We accidentally create a black hole and get to watch the Krellaks die with us." "What an optimistic fellow you are," Kira said, rolling her eyes so vigorously it was a wonder they didn't spin right out of her head. "Idris, if we're going out, can we at least make sure we take a few of those bastards with us?" "That's the spirit," Idris replied, feeling a spark of warmth at Kira's enthusiasm for mutual destruction. "Zed, I trust you're ready to turn this relic into the universe's most glorified bug zapper. You guys really know how to put the pressure on," Zed mumbled, fingers dancing over the relic's alien symbols like they were the keys to salvation or damnation. "Give me a minute. Hopefully, it won't involve any extra unintended consequences," Idris snorted. "Unintended consequences are our bread and butter." The ship shuddered as another Krellak salvo grazed the shields, which were already as reliable as a politician's promise. Idris tightened his grip on the console, the freighter's controls reassuring in their familiarity. "Jax, get ready to fire up the old smoke and mirrors. We're going to make these bastards see what they want to see." "Aye, Captain," Jax replied, grinning with the reckless glee of a man with nothing to lose except his life, which was mostly overrated anyway. "Let's give them a magic show they won't forget." The Krellak ships loomed ever closer, relentless and predatory, their sleek forms a promise of violence. Idris knew they were outgunned, outmatched, and possibly out of their minds, but that was just a typical Tuesday for his crew. "Here we go," Idris said, flipping switches with practiced precision. "Let's see if humanity's greatest strength, overconfidence, can save the day," Kira snorted. "Yeah, because when in doubt, bluff like your life depends on it." The freighter charged forward, a rust bucket with aspirations of grandeur. Idris guided it through the oncoming swarm, weaving between the Krellak's ships with all the skill of a drunk dodging sobriety. "Zed, you've got one shot, make it count." Zed muttered something under his breath that might have been a prayer or a curse, possibly both, and activated the relic. The device thrummed with power, a discordant symphony of alien tech and human desperation. A pulse of energy shot out, warping space around them like a funhouse mirror. The Krellak ships hesitated, their sensors struggling to process the anomaly that had appeared before them, a massive fleet of human vessels, all bristling with weapons and looking far more intimidating than reality would suggest. "Ha, look at him scatter," Jack said, clapping his hands together. "They think they've just walked into the wrong neighborhood. Let's hope their disbelief holds long enough for us to make a move," Idris said, his eyes fixed on the screen as he maneuvered the freighter into position. "Kira, Jax, ready for evasive maneuvers. We need to keep them confused and guessing. Playing hard to get," Kira quipped, checking her weapon settings. "I've had worse dates." The Krellak ships were in disarray, their formation breaking apart as they tried to regroup and reassess the threat. Idris seized the opportunity, pushing the freighter to its limits, the engines groaning in protest. "Zed, how's the relic holding up?" Idris called back, his voice steady even as his pulse raced. "Holding up is a strong term," Zed replied, sweat beading on his forehead. "It's more like trying not to explode under the strain. But hey, we're still here, right? For now," Idris said, a wry smile tugging at his lips. "Let's keep it that way." The foe fleet flickered ominously, the strain of maintaining the illusion evident even to the untrained eye. Idris knew they had minutes, maybe seconds, before the Krellaks realized the ruse. They needed a real plan and fast. All right, folks, plan B, Idris announced, determination threading his voice. When in doubt, hit them where it hurts. And where exactly is that? Kira asked, raising a skeptical eyebrow. Their pride, Idris answered, his grin bordering on the maniacal. We're going to make them think we've got some new tech they've never seen before. Bit of a long shot, don't you think? Jack said, his tone light despite the tension. But then again, long shots have been our bread and butter. Exactly, Idris said. Zed, can you ramp this thing up, make it look like it's about to detonate the galaxy? I don't know, Zed said, his fingers a blur over the controls, but I'll do my damnedest to make it look convincing. That's all I ask, Idris replied, focusing on the Krelak ships adjusting their positions. Everyone ready? Kira and Jax nodded, their confidence a fragile armor against the reality of their situation. Idris took a deep breath, centering himself, feeling the familiar rush of adrenaline. They were standing on the precipice, and there was no room for hesitation. The relic pulsed again, a kaleidoscope of energy that rippled through the void, lighting up the freighter like a signal fire. The Krelax hesitated, recalculating the odds, trying to decipher what new madness humanity had unleashed. Showtime, Idris said, his voice steady as a rock in a storm. Let's give them a spectacle to remember. The freighter surged forward, cutting through the chaos, Idris guiding it with confidence born from countless skirmishes and narrow escapes. The Krelax ships faltered, the haunting specter of the relic's unknown potential gnawing at their resolve. Zed, keep the pressure on, Idris commanded, his focus unwavering. We need them to believe we're the biggest threat in the galaxy. You got it, Captain, Zed replied, his fingers dancing over the relic's controls like a maestro at a grand performance. The energy from the relic flared, a beacon of defiance that dared the Krelax to challenge them. The alien ships wavered, their resolve shaken by the audacity of a ragtag crew defying the odds. Looks like they're buying it, Jack said, unable to keep the excitement from his voice. They're pulling back again. Never underestimate the power of a well-timed bluff, Idris said, a chuckle escaping him. Or the unpredictability of desperate humans. Yet, we're a real wild card, Kira replied, her expression a mix of exasperation and pride. Just hope we don't run out of luck before they run out of nerves. As the Krelax ships withdrew, regrouping and reassessing, Idris knew they had a momentary reprieve. But the battle was far from over, and they couldn't rely on tricks forever. All right, people, let's not get complacent, Idris warned, steering the freighter back towards the safety of the asteroid belt. Keep your eyes peeled and your weapons ready. We've won this round, but the war is still raging. Words to live by, Jack said, flashing a grin that was equal parts relief and adrenaline, or die by. Whatever comes first, just another day in paradise, Kira remarked, settling back into her seat with a sigh. Let's hope we can keep up the momentum. Idris nodded, feeling the weight of responsibility settle back onto his shoulders like a familiar cloak. They had bought themselves time, but the Krelax wouldn't stay fooled for long. They needed a real plan, and soon. As the stars wheeled past, Idris found himself contemplating the vastness of the universe and their small place within it. It was a harsh, unyielding place, full of dangers and uncertainties, but it was also filled with possibilities, and that was something worth fighting for. Get some rest, everyone, Idris said, his voice softer now. We'll need all the strength and ingenuity we can muster for the next round. The crew nodded, their camaraderie a silent testament to their shared struggle. They had survived another day, against impossible odds, and that was no small feat. As Idris leaned back, staring into the depths of space, he allowed himself a moment of quiet reflection. They were battered, bruised, and running on fumes, but they were still here. And as far as he was concerned, that was a victory in itself. For now, at least, Idris Vex and his crew had defied the universe's attempts to extinguish them. They had turned the tide, if only for a moment, using little more than human creativity and sheer stubbornness. In the grand tapestry of existence, they were but a single thread. But they were a thread that refused to be unraveled, no matter how hard the universe tried. And as long as they had each other, they would keep fighting, one day at a time. The freighter's engines whimpered their way into the relative safety of an asteroid belt that was as crooked as a politician's promises. Idris leaned back, stretching his aching muscles. Well, we survived another day in this galaxy's version of hell. Anyone else feel like we've just won the world's worst lottery? Jax laughed, though it was more of a wheeze. I'd celebrate, but given our luck, we'd probably just end up blowing ourselves up with confetti. Kira, the sort of person who made cynicism look like a fine art, smirked. Confetti, shrapnel, what's the difference? Both make a party more interesting. Zed wiped his brow, looking like he'd gone 10 rounds with a ghost. Well, that was fun, in a please-shoot-me-now kind of way. Idris surveyed his crew tired, battered, but unbroken, and felt a rare flicker of pride. Good job, everyone. We've managed to convince the interstellar bullies that we're not worth their lunch money. For now, anyway, the comm crackled to life, a voice as smooth as a snake oil salesman cutting through the static. It was the Tavek envoy, their so-called guide through this delightful death trap of an outpost. Impressive maneuver, Captain Vex. You have managed to do what most thought impossible. Yeah, well, Idris said, rubbing the back of his neck. We're kind of experts in the field of impossible, comes with the territory. You are now known throughout the system as formidable adversaries, the envoy continued, as if bestowing a dubious honor. Earth has gained a reputation today, Kira snorted. Great, just what we needed, a reputation. Can we trade it for some working shields? Zed glanced at the relic, which had finally stopped humming ominously. So does this mean we're not about to get vaporized, or is that still on the table? The Krelax will think twice before engaging you again, the Tavek envoy assured them. For now, they are recalibrating their strategy. Recalibrating, Jax repeated, leaning back in his seat. That sounds like code for run home to mommy. Idris chuckled, though there was little humor in it. Let's not get too comfortable. We've stirred up a hornet's nest, and hornets have this pesky habit of coming back to sting you when you least expect it. Speaking of hornets, Kira said, tapping a screen, we've got incoming messages from Earth. Looks like they want to congratulate their new heroes. Idris grimaced. Heroes, huh? Funny how people love to celebrate the survivors, like that somehow makes up for the ones who didn't make it. Well, we're alive, Jack said, pulling a face. Not sure if that's a victory or just a delay in the inevitable. The Tavek envoy's voice came through again, oozing the kind of confidence only a telepathic race could muster. Your actions today have changed perceptions, Captain. Earth will find new allies among the stars. Allies, huh, Idris muttered, rolling his eyes. Let's hope they're better at keeping their promises than our last batch. Kira leaned against the bulkhead, her expression contemplative. So what's next for us, Captain? Victory parade, Medal of Valor, or do we just go back to being the universe's punching bags? Idris considered this, running a hand through his hair. We keep moving, stay under the radar. Enjoy our newfound fame while it lasts, which I'd wager is about as long as a snowball in a supernova. Zed nodded, fiddling with the relic's controls. At least we know it's not going to blow us up. Today, anyway. Look on the bright side, Jack said with a grin. We've got a ship, a crew, and a galaxy that thinks we're 10 feet tall and bulletproof. And here I was, thinking the bright side involved actual sunlight, Kira drawled. Shows what I know. The freighter drifted through the debris field, a rust bucket with a new lease on life, tenuous though it was. Idris felt the weight of his decision settle back into place, as familiar as an old jacket that never quite fit right. He turned to his crew, the ragtag team that had somehow managed to outsmart death yet again. We take this one step at a time, folks. Keep our eyes open, our fingers on the trigger, and our wits about us. Always with the inspirational speeches, Jax teased, though there was respect in his tone. You should start charging for them. Yeah, maybe I should, Idris said, shaking his head. Except I'm pretty sure the universe would find a way to bounce the check. Kira crossed her arms, a wary smile playing on her lips. I guess this means we're not retiring anytime soon. Retirement? Zed said, his eyes wide with mock horror. What would we do with all that downtime? Learn to play space chess. The day I retire is the day I stop breathing, Idris said, his voice a touch more serious. This galaxy doesn't let you rest easy. The comm pinged again, this time with a congratulatory message from some Earth official Idris had never heard of. The words were filled with praise and promises, the kind that were easily forgotten once the ink dried. More platitudes from the home front, Idris said, waving a dismissive hand. They love us now, but give it a week. They'll find something else to distract them. A week, Kira asked, arching an eyebrow. You're an optimist, I give it 3 days. Then let's make the most of it, Idris said, his gaze drifting back to the view outside. We've done the impossible, let's see what else we can accomplish. The rust bucket freighter, battered and bruised but far from beaten, sailed into the void. The stars were their only constant, distant and indifferent, yet somehow comforting in their familiarity. Idris allowed himself a moment of silence, a fleeting pause in the never-ending chaos. They were small, insignificant in the grand scheme of things, but they were here. Still fighting, still defying the odds, still hoping for something better. All right, crew, Idris said, breaking the quiet. Let's see if we can keep this streak going. We've got a galaxy to explore, and I'm not about to let a little thing like common sense stop us. To the edges of sanity and beyond, Jack said, raising an imaginary glass in salute. Kira chuckled, a sound that was equal parts amusement and resignation. Just another day in the life of intergalactic misfits. Zed smiled, the tension in his shoulders easing ever so slightly. Misfits or not, we're still standing. As the freighter drifted onward, Idris felt a small measure of peace settle over him, a rare gift in a universe that seemed hellbent on chaos. They were alive together and ready for whatever came next. And if the universe had a problem with that, it could take a number and get in line.